So the article that I was asked to do a post about was prompts and prompt fading strategies for people with autism. The article was written by Gregory S. McDuff, Patricia Krantz, and Lynn McClellan. It discussed stimulus control, prompts, prompt fading, and overselectivity. McDuff described stimulus control as occurring when behavior occurs in the presence of specific stimuli as a result of prior reinforcement. They defined a prompt as an antecedent stimuli that are effective in getting responses to occur. So put another way, a prompt is a stimulus that controls a particular response. Prompt fading was defined as something that is necessary in withdrawing prompts gradually in small steps over a series of learning opportunities until no prompts are provided at all and the response occurs in the presence of the desired stimulus. And another thing the article mentioned is that transferring of stimulus control is prompt fading. And then overselectivity was defined as a hypothesis that suggests when presented with a stimulus that has more than one component, so if it has a relevant cue and a prompt, people with autism often respond to only some of the components. And they also discuss that this isn't just unique to autism, and it can be overcome by teaching learners to respond to multiple stimuli. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the classification of prompts. A verbal prompt is words or instructions or questions that are supposed to direct a person to engage in a target response. A verbal prompt is the most common and the hardest to get rid of or fade prompt used when teaching new skills. So an example of a verbal prompt would be if you are trying to teach a student to say thank you when given an object from a peer or an adult. What you would do if you were verbally prompting them would be give them the item and then say thank you, and the student should after that be able to say thank you, and that is the most assistance or the highest level of verbal prompting. So and then one of the next steps down would be to have it be you give them the item and then instead of saying say thank you, just say have the TH sound. So fading that from the full sentence of say thank you to fading it down to even just making a noise with your mouth would be the least restrictive verbal prompt. Modeling prompts are demonstrating or modeling a response. And this, a really good example of this would be peer tutoring. So oftentimes in my classroom, we have students that we have times where the students are all playing together with a particular thing. So taking the example of this picture, these two children are playing with blocks. And while playing with those blocks, one student could potentially be modeling for another student how to build a building taller. So the peers are modeling for their target response of another peer. Manual prompt or physical prompt is defined as a physical contact from an instructor that is designed to help the learner display a behavior of interest. So, for example, in the picture here, this person is instructing a learner to write ABC using a hand-over-hand physical prompt. Now, this is the most invasive, highest level prompt that you can use in the physical prompting or the manual prompt. So he's physically having his hand on the learner's hand and moving their hand to form the letters ABC. A gestural prompt includes pointing, motioning, or nodding towards students or materials or activities to indicate an action to be performed. So one example of this could be pointing. So if I was teaching a student to open the door, when I say open the door, if I were to give that direction, open the door, and they weren't able to go to the door, I might point at the door in order to remind them or prompt them for what they're supposed to be doing or what action they're supposed to be performing. Another thing that I utilize in my classroom is an eye gaze gestural prompt. So I might, if I have an array of 3 items and I'm asking the student to touch the car, I might use my eyes in order to like gesturally prompt them or motion them towards that item. Photographs and line drawings is when you utilize pictures and drawings to teach new skills. So an example that we use a lot would be a bathroom schedule or a bathroom instructions with photographs or drawings. So in the example that I have here, the drawings are of what you do when you go to the bathroom. So these drawings will tell a student how to do certain tasks in the bathroom. Textual prompts are written cues such as checklists, scripts, and written instructions. So a checklist could be as simple as when a student gets there, they're supposed to complete 3 tasks. They're supposed to put their backpack on the hook, hang their coat up on their chair, and take a seat in their chair. So the checklist could be as simple as handing the student that checklist every morning, and they're able to read those textual put backpack on hook, put coat on chair, sit in chair. Those can be like the checklist items that the student's actually able to physically check off when they've completed it. Another side to that would be the instructions. So an example that I like to use is I have a reader who when he goes to the bathroom, sometimes he forgets to do all the steps to washing his hands. So I have a little sign right by the mirror in front of the sink that says turn water on, wet hands, get soap, scrub hands, rinse soap, dry hands, throw away paper towel. So it's just simple couple word sentence instructions for the student to teach them how to wash their hands properly. And then a script can be used in a lot of social situations. So if you're wanting a student to greet other students in circle time, you could have a little strip of paper that says good morning or hi to prompt them to say those things to the peers. Some examples of other prompts would be a textile prompt, which the article described as like writing a letter or a number in glue and having sand or glitter or something that the student can feel go over that so that they can feel the letter or number. You can also use tones or alarms and color cues. So for the tones and alarms, the article described an activity where learners had wristbands that buzzed or made a sound that indicated it was time to play. And then a color cue, one that I use in my classroom for one of my students is I have a piece of colored tape that is placed on the back of their chair and at their desk and with their name on it. And so they're able to see that color because they're not readers yet, and they can sometimes recognize their name but not often, but they are able to recognize colors. So he knows that his chair is the red chair, and so that color cue along with the name on the chair directs him to his chair. The next thing I'm going to discuss is prompt fading. One prompt fading procedure is increasing assistance. So that's prompt fading that goes from the least assistance to the most assistance. It's really great because it allows the learner to make independent responses, but it also allows those students or those learners to make errors in their learning. So an example of this would be if you were teaching a student to write their name. You would start from the least assistance, so just giving them the pencil and the paper and not providing a prompt. And then if they weren't able to do it, you would move up to a little bit more. So maybe gesturing, pointing to the pencil. And then if that didn't work, you'd move up to a little more assistance and more assistance and more assistance until you were physically helping them pick up the pencil with their hand and write their name with your hand on top of theirs. So the hand over hand manual prompt. So this is good because it allows them to make those independent responses, but at the same time, they were able to multiple times before getting to that most assistance, which is potentially what they needed. On the opposite side is decreasing assistance. So that's prompts fading from the most assistance to the least assistance. And now learners aren't able to make errors when they're utilizing this type of prompt fading procedure. But one thing to keep in mind is that you shouldn't use verbal prompts because of dependency. Oftentimes with a verbal prompt, even though it's the most common, it is the hardest to fade. And another weakness is that it doesn't really allow for that independent prompting. You move from probing the tasks. So say you ask them to write their name and you don't give them any sort of assistance and you notice that they don't use their name, you're going to go all the way up to that hand over hand with the decreasing assistant prompt fading technique. And so you're not giving them the ability to have a less restrictive form of assistance or prompt. So you're moving right up to the most assistance. So it doesn't really allow for that independence. Delayed prompts allow for a brief period of time before the naturally occurring stimulus and the delivery of the prompt. So still using my name writing example, it's asking them to write their name, which is a naturally occurring stimulus. And then you wait a couple seconds and then you deliver that prompt. It's great because it allows for those independent responses, and it can be effective and efficient in transferring stimulus control with few errors. But learners might often wait for that response rather than attempting to answer. Graduated guidance, as defined by McDuff, is the instructor provides manual prompts to complete an action and then fades these prompts by changing their intensity or location. So this is great because it prevents errors and delays, but oftentimes you see that it's usually paired with another type of fading procedure. So its weakness is that it's just not usually used alone. So an example of this was still that name writing example would be that rather than, moving from that hand over hand to just a tap on the hand. And so you're changing that intensity of the prompt that you're giving. So you're not having your whole hand on their hand, you're just tapping their hand as a reminder of, this is what you use in order to write your name. McDuff defines stimulus fading as exaggerating some physical dimension to the color, the size, the intensity of a relevant stimulus to help a person make a correct response. The exaggerated feature is the prompt, which is gradually faded or reduced in order to transfer stimulus control from the prompt to the stimulus that will ultimately control the behavior of interest. And the strength is that there's a low error rate, but it's really hard to exaggerate the relevant dimensions of stimuli that should eventually control those desired responses. So sometimes it's hard to find out ways to change the physical dimension or make it like something super bright. So one example is for name writing, I have a student that has tools that help with name writing. So he has a really thick black box right now that's on lined paper for him to write his name inside of, to teach writing his name smaller and not over the whole page or in different sizes. And so then we move to something less intense. So a highlighter line that's not as dark, not as defined. And then we would eventually move just to the lined paper. And that would be a way of changing the physical dimensions, so the size or the color or the intensity of the relevant stimulus or prompt. But sometimes it's hard to find things like that. Sometimes it's hard to find ways to do that. So if you had an array of cards and you were teaching a student to find car, it would be hard to figure out a way to change the intensity, color, or size of that picture at times. It's a lot of materials and it's a lot of work, and then to figure out how to fade that intensity, size, or color. And stimulus shaping is kind of similar to that as well. It's the physical characteristics of the stimuli used in teaching gradually change. So it's effective and it's nearly airless, but there's a lot of prep work in this as well. Some guidelines for prompt fading is that prompts should be used judiciously. That means that, they produce correct responses. There's opportunity for reinforcement. They're faded as quickly as possible. And you know that too many trials at one prompting level may reinforce dependence on those prompts. And then prompts should not be faded too quickly because that might result in errors that impede the acquisition of that new skill. Increasing assistance procedures should be used to probe responses. So going from that least restrictive at the very beginning to figure out how much they know. And then with the decreasing assistance procedures, those should be used when you're teaching those new skills. So getting up to the most assistance that student needs and then trailing back down to the least assistance. And if errors do occur, the level of prompting should go back to the previous level. So if you were teaching somebody to write their name with the hand over hand prompt and you moved to just the tapping of the hand and they were not able to write their name with just the tapping of the hand and they were making errors and just scribbling on their page, that means that you need to go back to that hand over hand previous level of prompting. And it's also important to shift from the prompted responses to the unprompted responses when it comes to reinforcement. So making sure that in the beginning you are giving them a little bit of a reinforcer, saying great job when they do write their name, even if it's hand over hand, but moving towards giving them more exciting response or exciting reinforcement for those unprompted responses. So when they do write their name when you didn't prompt them, really giving them like the greatest attention, saying you did such a great job and things like that, like really giving them that super awesome reinforcement for an unprompted response so that they know that it's way more exciting when they do something without having that little bit of help. And it's really, really important to know that some procedures are not effective for all skills and all learners. Every learner might learn something differently for different skills, and just because somebody learns a particular skill with a certain prompt fading procedure doesn't mean that that same skill can be taught to somebody else. It's really important to do that direct observation and that measurement in order to figure out really what's going to be the most appropriate for each particular skill and each particular learner. And the factors that influence effectiveness and efficiency of prompting and prompt fading are the characteristics of those learners. So really using that direct observation that you've had in figuring out certain things about those learners, what's effective for them, what's not effective for them, what certain things are they able to do, what certain things are they able to not do, because it's going to be really important to figure out if a student can't differentiate between a really thick bold line and a highlighter line or things like that. It's going to be really important for you to figure out those characteristics of the learners. And it's also going to be really important for you to really know the prompts, figure out what it all entails in doing the prompts, because if a certain prompt is something you're not super comfortable with, you're not going to be able to do it completely and effectively and efficiently, and it's not going to provide a really great learning experience for the learner. And it's really important to also take into consideration the difficulty of implementing these procedures, because some of the procedures are really hard and it takes a lot of effort and it takes a lot of tools. And if you just don't have those, if you just don't understand it, then you're not going to be able to effectively or efficiently prompt or fade those prompts. And it's not going to give you those results that you need. And this was the last slide of my presentation. I think I covered everything that there was in the in the objectives for this particular article. Please, if you have any questions or if you need clarification on anything, I'm more than happy to provide that. So if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you.